Alright, this is Marvel Superheroes Spring Special from 1992. This is one of the several books that Marvel did that were a not so discreet way to make sure that commissioned inventory stories got printed. In this, we have 2 unpublished fill-in issues of West Coast Avengers. We have an unused fill-in issue of 4. And then an 8-page story that was likely extra Marvel Comics Presents crap. This cover bothers me because this gap here, you could have fit in more members of the Avengers, like Hawkeye or Wonder Man, who are in that story. And it is that story that I am mainly going to talk about. Dwayne Mcmilestone, he wrote 2 fill-in issues for West Coast Avengers during Jason Byrne's run, but they were never needed, so a few years later they got printed here. It's not exceptional, but it's perfectly enjoyable for what it is. Cupid comes knocking on the West Coast Avengers' door, and he has come in search of Mockingbird, who he thinks is his long-lost love reincarnated. The Avengers respond to him, as you would imagine they do, so a fight between them breaks out. Iron Man gets one-shotted, which is something I always love to see. And then Wonder Man gets one-shotted, which is something I always didn't love to see. U.s.agent, he doesn't even get one-shotted. He gets pinned to the wall with one of Cupid's arrows and then knocked out. It took 2 attacks to take him out. Based on this comic, u.s.agent is better than Iron Man and Wonder Man. The rest of the West Coast Avengers arrive, and Wonder Man is back for round 2 as well. If you have been watching me channel for a bit, you know that I am big into when comics just offer superhero fights, and this is okay at that. We get a nice little bit with Aunt Gordon pulling out a shrunken down missile launcher that he had in his pockets and blasting Cupid. I like that bit, but then we have the kind of clunky cliffhanger plot part that isn't a cliffhanger because you know that it isn't real. Charlotte Witch, she gets shot with one of Cupid's arrows, and then so does Wonder Man and Gordon and Wasps. And the rest of the Avengers are really angry with Cupid because he has appeared to slay 4 of their members. And one thing that doesn't help this dramatic effort at all is on the page before, when he was readying his bow, he had a line of dialogue simply telling them to sleep. So it is really obvious to us that his arrows just put them to sleep. He does one-shot Iron Man for a second time though. And then he finishes by one-shotting another character. He hits Vision with another sleep arrow because he is a god and his arrows are not affected by Vision's density control. And sexy woman. This is Aphrodite, the Greek god of love, not to be confused with Friday from the Angels of Aslan. This is one of the few appearances where it is actually Aphrodite, and pleasingly, with regards to the retcon, that there is two separate characters. She is called Aphrodite in this. She is fit though, and this is all a evil plan to take over the Olympic gods. Cupid tracks down Mockingbird, who was actually not with the West Coast Avengers at the time, as we saw in my review of West Coast Avengers 46. She moved with Hawkeye to train the Great Lakes Avengers. We could have had a nice cameo from them here, but we didn't. We get a little bit on Cupid and his long-lost love. And then he kidnaps Mockingbird, convinced that she is resurrected and that she just doesn't remember. As Cupid departs, Hawkeye challenges him to an archery contest to win Mockingbird, which Mockingbird rightfully points out is the dumbest thing she has ever heard. But Cupid agrees to it. Hawkeye isn't going to play fair though. He calls up Hercules man to come and help them beat up Cupid. And this is where the first issue would have ended. But there is an interesting switch around of pages. This here would actually have been the splash page opening for the second issue. But this page and then this one, they would have been the end of the issue, with the cliffhanger being that Hawkeye realizes that most of the West Coast Avengers are dead. So we begin what would be our second part here, with Hawkeye arriving, and u.s.agent is having a breakdown. He is blaming himself for the other Avengers dying. And it is really understated in a way, but this is some nice stuff with him. It doesn't outright say it, but he is obviously distraught because it reminds him of how he couldn't day out to save his parents from being gunned down. And there is a neat little payoff in a few pages' time. But we get a flashback to what has happened so far, in case you couldn't recognise that this was 2 fill-in issues printed as one long story. And then Hercules man arrives, and because he knows Cupid and he is an Olympic god himself, he knows that the arrows are just sleep arrows, and if you pull them out, the person wakes up. Here is that payoff I mentioned. Wonder Man antagonises u.s.agent for his uselessness in the fight, and Hawkeye steps in and tells Wonder Man to back off. It is a nice little bit. Again, I would say slightly understated, but it is a good character bit. With regards to the ongoing West Coast Avengers series, I'm not sure if Hawkeye was the right character to defend u.s.agent, but in a vacuum, it is good. So then Cupid shows up and we have another big Avengers fight with him. And Hercules man gets to return the favour of one-shotting by one-shotting Cupid. They then quickly talk things over and they realise that Cupid is being used by Aphrodite. So the team gone to Olympic Fairyland, and it is this part of the story I feel could be expanded. When you have the Avengers gone to another realm, it feels wrong to have spent so much of this story in the backyard of their house. They end up fighting some Olympic soldier boys who are being commanded by the sexy woman Aphrodite. She is trying to claim rulership from Liam Neeson from Clash of the Titans. She wants to rule Olympic Fairyland herself. And then eventually Aphrodite, she comes into the fight herself and she gasses the Avengers with love, sleep, gas. And they all fall to it, but due to his slightly heightened resistance, u.s.agent holds out just a bit longer, and he is able to toss Hawkeye aside and out of harm's way so that he wakes up later while the rest of the team have been captured and bound by her. So in a way, once again, u.s.agent is the most unappreciated hero in the world, because they would have been totally screwed if he didn't throw Hawkeye out of sight. And it is very lucky that it was Hawkeye that he saved, because it turns out Hawkeye's archery is the only thing that can stop Aphrodite. And then, because it is only a fill-in story, it has a very abrupt ending with Cupid thanking them and then giving Hawkeye a magic arrow, because Hawkeye is the best archer he has ever seen. After that, we have a 4-story. It stars everybody's favourite 4 bad guy, the Thermal Man. Remember him? He is your favourite 4 bad guy. He is my favourite 4 bad guy. He is everybody's favourite 4 bad guy. I have to be careful around about now because one of the pages is loose. This would have been a random fill-in issue during Tom Falcon's run before Tom Hiddleston died and 94 took over the book. It also loosely follows up on a backup story featured in 4 Annual 15, but then we get into the more hazardous waters of chronological placement, because this is either unworkable or it means that this and the backup story in 4 Annual 15 have to be brought forward by almost an entire year. By the way, this is why I tend to skip backup stories. This video is going to be like 15 minutes long. The Thermal Man, he was just a lazy rehash of the Destroyer droid, which by matter of fact is one of my actual favourite 4 baddies. This would have been a totally fine fill-in issue to run, but if it never saw the light of day, nobody would complain. Tom Hiddleston has taken control of Thermal Man, and he is attacking Fairyland. And so we have our action, and it is a tough fight for 4, which leads us to the continuity problem, which is he puts on his battle armour. This was meant to be destroyed in 413 when he found out that Tom Hiddleston had put a curse on it. So this story, it has to take place before that issue, but that means that it is almost a year before 4 Annual 15 came out, which is also required to have happened for this story to happen. And it's just always a nightmare to try and organise comics chronologically, so you might as well give up. Maybe they didn't use this inventory story for that very reason. Or maybe it's because 4 is responsible for a nuclear holocaust that surely kills thousands of frost monsters in Fairyland. There is some okay action in it, but it's not a great story. And then we have an Iron Man one. It is 8 pages long, so it was very likely intended for Marvel Comics Presents. I despise Marvel Comics Presents and their useless 8-page stories. And what I despise even more is Kurt Busiek, and he writes this, so I'm not wasting my time reading it. Marvel Superheroes Spring Special is on paper a pointless endeavour. Here is some stories Marvel didn't use from 2 or 3 years prior. They have no impact and so little importance that they went unpublished for years and nobody knew that there was anything missing. There is some charm to the Avengers story. There is some neat bits and a plot that isn't totally terrible. 4 is inoffensive in its own way. The fight is good, but we still have the case that these are, by design, inconsequential stories. I think they both could have been printed as intended, but the fact that they were not is a greater critique of them than anyone could ever offer. Maybe check out the Avengers one if you are bored. The 4 one, the 4 one also wasn't even collected in the Epic collections when they did Tom Falcon's run. They just ignored it. I'll give this comic 7 thumbs up.